Hi, everyone. So I wanted to talk, just like to identify and define what coercive control is. I see coercive control, frankly, as an epidemic. I see it as the underpinning of all abuse. When we think about abuse, what we know is that it is typically about one person exerting power and control over another. Think about it. Sexism, racism, child abuse, sex trafficking, of course, domestic abuse. I see it as the underpinning of it all. And frankly, it's a pattern to dominate another. It can be overt. All too often, I hear people calling coercive control invisible abuse. That is not accurate. It is not invisible. It is the underpinning of all abuse. It can be physically violent and oftentimes is. The difference is that we used to only look through the violent incident model when we thought about abuse. And what we know is that abuse often starts off covertly, insidiously, can be very nuanced. It is a grooming process. It is where one person attempts to, or a group of people attempts to exert power and control over another or a group of people in an attempt to take away their autonomy, their agency, their ability to know what they should really know, like to know who they are. Abusers try to take that away from victims, survivors, and that's their goal. It's intentional. Their goal is to diminish another human being or diminish again groups of people in an attempt to use basically people's vulnerabilities against them to create a space where they can exert power and control over others. Of course, psychological tactics are used. It's a grooming process. It's what is used to get people engaged in cults. It's how child predators abuse. They groom children, right? And so it's these psychological tactics that are really, really hard to identify, but it is manipulation. It is gaslighting, changing someone's reality, making someone believe something that is not actually true, right? It is intimidation. It is intimidating someone, whether it's physical intimidation, verbal assaults. It can be even just intimidation through someone knowing what will happen if they don't follow the rules. And it's isolation. Those are psychological tactics. It's also oftentimes, and more often than not, we know that about 99% of victim survivors suffer financial abuse. And that can be putting someone on a budget, not allowing people to spend money the way that they want to, perhaps not sharing bank accounts, or the abuser has all of the money. It also can mean that a victim survivor is doing all of the work or is contributing more than their fair share. That's the key to all of this, is that it's about dominance. It's about inequality in a relationship dynamic. It can be and often is post-separation, legal abuse. It can be and often is weaponization of children where there are shared children. And of course, sexual abuse can occur also. It is about creating inequality in a relationship dynamic so that I, an abuser, can exert power and control over you, a victim. And sadly, what happens is victims and survivors will continue to give more in these relationships, to try harder. We know that victims and survivors are often highly agreeable and conscientious, and perpetrators are often highly disagreeable and neurotic. They are obsessed with retaining that control. Those of us in the field call it death by a thousand paper cuts. In other words, you may have physical evidence of abuse, but also all of these tiny little nuanced behaviors that wear us down and take away our agency and our autonomy are coercive control also. It's all coercive control. As Dr. Evan Stark so eloquently stated, coercive control is like carpenter ants devouring the foundation of a house. You don't even know it's happening until it's too late. And so when the physical violence has occurred, there has already been a pattern of domination occurring over the long term. It is a liberty crime. It takes away our autonomy and our agency, which is why victims and survivors become so trauma bonded in these relationships. Abusers will give less and less and less, and the boundaries will shift more and more and more away from the victim. And this is what abusers count on. It is intentional. It is all extremely harmful. If you've never had a physical violent episode, you've never had a bruise, it doesn't mean you weren't abused. If you have had physical violence, and those are horrifying situations, you also have suffered trauma, very much like victims and survivors who have never had a physical experience. This abuse, it's again the foundation of all abuse, is extremely harmful and harmful to the developing brain when children are experiencing it in the home where a perpetrator is exerting this power and control over everyone in the family system. So, again, in a nutshell, I see coercive control as something that is occurring intentionally. It is taking advantage of someone's vulnerabilities. It is about dominating another person, even if I do so intermittent with love and affection. That doesn't matter. If there is inequality in the relationship, then that is coercive control. So I hope that's helpful.